Well, hey guys, it's been a while. Man, how is that? I feel like I've been up here, like 2 minutes ago? So get a little cardio, hopping up and down the stage. No big deal. Man, hey, good morning. Man, it's good to hang out with you guys. Hope you guys had a good weekend. We got to celebrate Ellie's 5th birthday this weekend. It is bananas that I am now a parent of a kindergartner. Yeah, I had that moment this week. I was like, she's in kindergarten. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is crazy. It's going by so fast. But man, well, I'm excited this morning. Actually, I'm curious for you guys. As I try to work this, I feel like, well, let's see if I can get it going here. How many of you guys have ever gotten something, maybe something you were looking forward to, or something you were just like, man, really excited to have, or something you were like, man, if I had this one thing, it'd make my life so much better. And then you finally get it, and it's like, oh. Have you guys ever had that moment? Like something like, oh man, this is going to be really fun. I'm really excited about it. Maybe it was like an experience, right? Maybe it was, if you're a kid, you had a video game, like, dude, this video game is it. I'm never going to be bored again. And about 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, when's the next one coming out, right? For me, I kind of think about this experience mainly when I was a little bit late bloomer to learning to drive a little bit. I've kind of procrastinated a little bit. But when I finally, I got to this point when I was a little bit later in high school, and I was like, man, I can't wait to drive, right? My life is going to be infinitely so much better when I can learn to drive. I don't have to rely on mom and dad to take me anywhere. I can go hang out with my friends whenever I want. Because I remember, there were a lot of times in summer where I would be waiting at home, waiting for my friends to get off work to come pick me up to hang out. And so I had to figure out what to do most of the day, or I'm like, oh man, if my mom and dad say I can't go somewhere, well then I'm just stuck at home. And so I had this image in my mind that dude, learning to drive was going to be this form of utopia, right? That I can go to McDonald's whenever I wanted, or I could drive myself to work, or I could do all these, go hang out with my friends. And then I finally got my license. I finally able to drive. I get in the car of my 1998 Oldsmobile Intrigue, right? Yeah, that was I love that car, man. It was like a boat on wheels. I felt so powerful. And I'm driving around in this Oldsmobile. I'm blasting my tunes. I'm like, yeah, this is great. And it was awesome for the first week. And then I started noticing this foreign gauge on my dashboard that had an E and an F. And that needle started to move closer to the E. And then I realized there's this thing called gas that costs money that I didn't really have too much of at the time. And then I started realizing, I should probably fill that up. And so I fill up my tank, and my bank account started going lower and lower. And then there's this thing called maintenance on my car that kind of started becoming a real thing. And I had to start investing more and more money into this. And pretty soon, driving was a little bit less fun, right? Because there was still some joys to it, but I didn't, realizing how much money it costs, especially when you're fresh out of high school, was a little bit of a reality check, right? It was a little bit of a moment of this wasn't totally what I thought it was going to be, right? And maybe you've had those kind of moments in different seasons of your life, where maybe you thought something was going to make your life infinitely easier, make it so much better, and then you finally get it, and it's that wasn't quite it. And so we keep chasing. Right, and I think that all of us, we have this tendency to chase after things, thinking that getting them will make our life so much better that they'll give us this lasting joy and peace that we've been seeking after. Only to find out it's kind of oh, that wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, right? Maybe it's a career, right? Maybe you thought, man, if I can get this one job, this one promotion, or man, my life is going to be so much better. I feel like I'm going to be a lot happier. My life's going to have more meaning to it if I can get this job. And then, or maybe for you, it's the money, right? Maybe it's the idea, if I can just get more money, if I can make $20,000 more, or X amount, fill in the blank, X amount of dollars more, well, then I can do all the things I've been wanting to do, and then my life will be better. I'll be happier. Or maybe it's, this idea of success. If I can just accomplish this thing, then man, then I'll be happier. If I can do this better, finish this, then maybe I'll be happier. Maybe I'll have the sense of meaning and purpose in my life that I've been looking for. And I want to say, in one sense, there's nothing wrong necessarily with those things. There's obviously nothing wrong with, seeking after a career that you're passionate about, or man, there's nothing wrong with ambition, obviously, chasing after a goal. However, these things on their own, as some of us have probably learned, don't lead to lasting meaning and happiness in and of themselves. Because these things are not guaranteed to last. Right? Things like career, things like money, most things in our life are not guaranteed to last. And a lot of times we're not in control of how long they last. Right? That we're not totally in control of how long these last, how long the joy that those things bring us, that they're fleeting. And so the question that we're asking this morning is, if these things can't bring us lasting meaning or significance, then what is the answer? Then what do we do with that? Right? If these things can't bring us lasting happiness or joy, then where do we find it? Where do we find meaning that lasts? Or maybe another way of asking this question is, how do we live a life well lived in a chaotic world? And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. In fact, we're going to be going into the book of Ecclesiastes to talk. How many have ever read the book of Ecclesiastes out of curiosity? Yeah, some of us have. It is a beautiful book. And a lot of times, I'll be honest, this is, of all the books in the Bible, this is probably one of my favorite books. And I say that sometimes when people give me this weird look, like, why? Right? Because unfortunately, Ecclesiastes has this really bad reputation of being kind of a bummer book. I mean, honestly, right? That people think like, man, that's kind of a downer of a book, but it's actually really beautiful. Because there's something really meaningful. It really kind of lays out, what does this mean for us to find meaning in God, even when life feels chaotic and unpredictable? Right? And if you haven't read it before, this morning, we're going to give I want to give a little bit of an overview, a little bit of some background on the book of Ecclesiastes to kind of help us jump into this. Ecclesiastes is part of the Bible that is what we call the wisdom literature. So like Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. And really, all of the wisdom books are wrestling through this question of, man, what does it mean to live well in this world? Like, how do we find meaning? What does it mean to have the good life? And they're all wrestling through this question together, and each of them tackle it from like a different angle. Like when we read Proverbs, it really focuses on how God is wise and just, and that that things will generally go well for us when we seek after God and live wisely. And then we get to Ecclesiastes, and it's like explores this idea of, man, what does it mean for us to live well, even when things don't go the way we planned, or even when we feel like things happen to us that aren't deserved? Like, man, I did the right thing, but yet things were still difficult. What do I do with that? And then Job is kind of like that, it kind of lands the plane where it says, well, even when things are good, even when things are bad, well, what is it actually, like, how do we trust God in the midst of all that? I heard someone say, like, the wisdom books it's like if there would be a personality, like a Proverbs would be like getting coffee with like the young teacher who's just excited about life. Yeah, right? And then Ecclesiastes is like that. Maybe they're in like a little bit older, but they're kind of more of a critic. Right? They're maybe like the school teacher was drinking a pumpkin spice latte, while Ecclesiastes is drinking black coffee at a Starbucks, right? And then Job is kind of like that wise sage, right? That's like kind of lived life and can kind of say, hey, well, here's what I've learned. And so reading through the book of Ecclesiastes, I'm going to be honest, it can be difficult and it can be uncomfortable at times. Right? It can be difficult and uncomfortable because it's not going to offer us simplistic answers to things we're going to ask. Because a lot of times life just really isn't simplistic. And Ecclesiastes is going to acknowledge that. And sometimes the answers are going to be uncomfortable, right? That they're going to share some hard truths with us that are going to be uncomfortable for us to sit with. However, I do want to point out the purpose of this book is not just to be a theological wet blanket, right? That's not what the author's after. That's not what the teacher is after. It's not trying to cause us to lose hope, but to make us humble. That's ultimately what this goal is. That the teacher in this book wants us to wrestle through the complexities of life and to trust that life does have meaning found in God, even when we don't totally understand what's happening around us. And so to do that, the teacher's going to take us on this journey of deconstructing all these ways that we try to find meaning on our own and try to find meaning apart from God. And he's going to show us how, man, we can be tempted to really exert so much emotional energy and invest so much time in things that ultimately don't have a lot of lasting meaning or significance. At some time, like that, they're fleeting. That they're not going to bring about that lasting joy and happiness. And so for the sake of time, right, we're not going to read through the whole book of Ecclesiastes, right? It is a beautiful book. I would encourage you to go read it this week. If you haven't read through it before, read through it. But what we're going to do instead is I want to look at some key themes that are through the book of Ecclesiastes, read through some key themes, and then really look at, man, what are these key themes? What's the teacher trying to teach us about what it means to live well, and what does it mean to find lasting meaning in a chaotic world? And so keeping all that in mind, I want to just have you just join me in diving into this book together. And so to start off, right, this book, there's a main, if you've read it, like, you know that there's like kind of like this main key metaphor that is just kind of woven throughout the entire book of Ecclesiastes. And it's this. And so, he starts off verse 2 right away, right, man, just like everything is meaningless, right? And maybe you got to this point in the book and you're like, oh no, right? If you read it like, man, he says everything is meaningless as a teacher, completely meaningless. And when we read that word, right, that sometimes we read that, and this is where this book can be difficult. We're like, man, that seems like counterintuitive to like, what do you mean meaningless? What does that mean, meaningless? Well, the word meaningless doesn't actually mean that there's no meaning to life. But there's actually a Hebrew word that comes with meaningless, and the word is hevel. And it literally means breath, vapor, or smoke. So it's meant to be a metaphor. So when we read the word meaningless in Ecclesiastes, he's not telling us that, man, life doesn't have meaning, but he's trying to tell us that like smoke, life can be temporary or fleeting, or it can be like an enigma. It can be hard to understand and doesn't always make sense. And so he's setting off this metaphor, like, man, rather than trying to find lasting meaning and joy in things like our careers, our wealth, our success, maybe our own status, he says that finding meaning in those things is futile. And so, and that whenever we try to find our own personal meaning and significance in those things, he says it's like trying to grasp at smoke. That right when we think we have it, it slips through our fingers. And so he says it's like, and there's another metaphor that he uses in the book called, it's like chasing after the wind. And so he says this metaphor, and so he's going to kind of walk us through this book and showing us, man, why he's going to unpack why finding our meaning in those things is futile. But then he's also going to help us redirect and help us say, how do we then, if these themes are true, and these things that we look for typically don't really point us in the right direction, they don't really bring us lasting meaning, then where do we find it? And so that's where he's going to bring us. And so I want you to hang with me on this journey. This is, like I said, it's a beautiful book. I think there's a lot for us to learn. And so he takes this metaphor, and there's three key themes that he's going to take us through on this book, as far as, man, like telling us themes about truths that come with life. And the first one is this. He says, okay, well, why is it that these things don't really bring lasting joy or happiness? Or why are these chasing after these things and finding meaning in these things futile? He said, for one, it's because life is a blip, right? Life is a blip. In Ecclesiastes 1:4-11, he tells us, generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. We don't remember what happened in the past, and in future generations, no one will remember what we are doing now. So he's saying on a cosmic scale, our lives are like a blip on the radar. And then when you look at just the grand cosmos of all of history, all of everything that's happening, he says our lives and everything we do is like a blip. That the things we accomplish in this world are mere little, just kind of like a blink in the grand scheme of things. And he's not saying that we shouldn't work for things, right? He's not saying we shouldn't have ambition. He's not saying like, well, it doesn't matter to just give up. That's not what he wants for us, right? But what he's saying is that what he's telling us is that what he wants us to do is to put our lives and what we do into perspective. Right? That what he's trying to convey to us is that the joy of our accomplishments, that if what we're finding our worth, our significance in those things, he says eventually our joy for those things will fade away over time. And what we do, those accomplishments, will kind of fade away as well. Like they'll kind of be forgotten. And so finding our meaning in that is futile. It's like chasing after the wind. I'll give you a good example, right? How many of you guys every year watch the Super Bowl, or at least are aware of the Super Bowl that's happening, right? Most of us kind of know. How many, just out of curiosity, who knows who won the Super Bowl last year? Go ahead and shout it. It's okay. This is the Chiefs, of course, right? Patrick Mahomes, he did it. Okay, we'll do a little test. How many of you guys remember who won in 2013? Does anybody know? Close. Baltimore Ravens. Seahawks were 14. Ha-ha! Let's take this back a little bit further. Okay, 2003. Anyone remember that? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't the Cleveland Browns. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then I'm going to go 1993, and we're going back even further. You remember? Dallas, there you go. Way to go, man. Gold star. If I had like a piece of candy, I'd give it to you, but you'll sell for finger guns. Good job, man. Here's the thing, right? Like, all of us, right? And it's fun. The Super Bowl is one of those things. It's almost like a holiday, right? Where, like, man, that things shut down on Super Bowl Sunday, right? People, like, even if you're not, like, a very low-key fan of football, like a very nominal fan, usually you kind of you're aware of at the very least are aware of the Super Bowl. You know what's happening, and sometimes you'll go to Super Bowl parties, even if you're not a fan. Maybe partly because of the food. Like, dude, there's going to be some wings there. There's going to be some chili. There's going to be some good food. You'll show up to those things. But as big, isn't it funny how big of a deal as it is, how quickly we forget who won? That as much, like, man, there's parades that come after this. Man, people, like, these athletes strive their whole lives to get to that point. And after they win, it's like, okay, on to the next one. And just eventually these Super Bowls kind of get lost into oblivion. And so this teacher's trying to tell us, like, man, that these accomplishments, if, like, there's, once again, man, there's nothing wrong with working hard. And actually, like, it's a really cool that they have athletes that, they work hard and they get to experience that achievement, and that's great. He says, man, but if that's where you're really finding your meaning, if that's really finding your self-worth, your significance, he goes, man, I encourage you not to put it there, because eventually the glory of that fades, and even these accomplishments themselves can be forgotten in the course of time. So he says, keep perspective. So life is a blip, right? That chasing after things, trying to find meaning in things apart from God. He says it's futile because, number one, it's a blip. Life is just, it's a blip. In the grand scheme of things, it's a small little blink. But he also says that life is fleeting, right? Life is fleeting. He says in Ecclesiastes 9, he says, so I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands, but no one knows whether love or hate awaits them. All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. As it is with the good, so it is with the sinful. And as it is with those who take oaths, so with those who are afraid to take them. This is the evil and everything that happens under the sun. The same destiny overtakes all. The hearts of people, moreover, are full of evil, and there is madness in their hearts while they live, and afterward they join the dead. Not exactly a coffee mug slogan, right? You're not finding that on like a Hallmark card, but there is a truth to that, right? That life is fleeting. And what he's meaning is that most things in life at some point come to an end, right? Not very many things, besides our relationship with God, and things, there's most things in life have an end. They don't last forever. Kind of a lighthearted example. My daughter, like I said, we had her birthday party this weekend, and she loves balloons, specifically like helium balloons, right? And she loves those things, and she will hold on to these things like usually I think like after a few days, kids kind of lose interest. Not her. Like she had this one helium balloon at her last birthday that lasted for like 3 months. Like she had this thing. It just kind of became this crumpled, like, I don't even know what material it's made of, but the little crinkly stuff. It was just like this pile in her room, and I'm like, kiddo, I hate to break it to you, like it's done. Like it's the balloon is gone. Like it's and so it was for her like she had this balloon, she loved it, but slowly it just kind of kept losing air, and eventually it had an end to it, right? And so this thing for her was fleeting. And I think in a lot of ways, right, that this kind of captures what the author is getting at. is that he's encouraged us, man, like as much as we love the things in this world, like it's okay to enjoy them, right? It's okay to love what you do for work. It's okay to love taking a nice vacation. But understand that these things are fleeting. They don't last forever. And that includes even our own lives, or at some point, our lives end. At some point, we die. And so he's telling us that, man, recognize that things come to an end. Things don't last forever. And so trying to attach our meaning to those things is futile because of that, because they don't last forever. And so the next one is this. He says, so life is a blip, life is fleeting, but then life is unpredictable, right? That some things happen that we can't control and that we can't predict, right? I think back to 2020, and a lot of things that happened, right, were unpredictable. Right, especially at the beginning. I don't know if you guys remember where you were at when you kind of learned that things were locking down. Like, okay, things are going to look a lot different now. I remember I was shopping. I was getting ready to go for like a mission at my old church. We're getting ready to plan for like a mission trip meeting potentially, or get ready for things, and found out everything was getting shut down. I think that this virus is really spreading. We're going to have to really hunker down. And I remember I had bought like this giant sandwich for this. For this meeting, and I found out, okay, everything's canceled, and I'm like, what do I do with the sandwich? Like, don't worry, Jim, I did eat it. The question of what I did with the food did not last that long. I should say I didn't wrestle with that one too long. But right, if you think back to maybe that season of life, I think we could all have part of the stress was how unpredictable things felt. Right, that I'll be honest, that was one of the moments in my life where I've never felt more out of control in my life, where I felt like, man, I am just kind of like, I don't know what's around the corner. I don't know what's going to happen next. And I think we all felt that, right? That we all felt that sense of unpredictability. And I think life, really, from our vantage point, it feels like that sometimes, right? It feels really unpredictable. Like, it doesn't always make sense or happen the way that we mapped it out, and some things seemingly just come out of nowhere and without our ability to really control it. And the teacher in Ecclesiastes really puts his finger on this. He says, I've seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. Moreover, no one knows when their hour will come. As fish are caught in a cruel net or birds are taken in a snare, so people are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. So once again, he's telling us, man, like, don't, for us to try to find our meaning and significance in some of the things around us, like our careers, money, fill in the blank for you what that is. But he says, man, don't fall trapped to that, because life is unpredictable. If we're putting our meaning in things and those things can, we're not totally in control of everything around us. And so don't find your worth or significance or meaning in those things, because they can be taken away. Now, thankfully, right, that's not where the book ends, right? Ecclesiastes doesn't say those things and goes, well, that's it. Close the book, right? And like there is hope to this, right? There is hope. And I think that's what the author wants us to say is like, man, that there is hope. And like he gives us these truths and say, these things are not where we should put our hope, guys. Like, these things are not where we should put our meaning. But then he doesn't leave us hanging. He says, so what are we supposed to do with these truths, right? We all know these in some level, right? Maybe we don't always vocalize them, but we know these things are true. And so if our lives are really like a blip on the cosmic radar, right? If life truly is unpredictable, if really life is fleeting, then how do we actually live well in this world? Or how do we find meaning in the midst of all the hevel? What do we do with that? And thankfully, right, throughout the book, he gives us throughout these metaphors and these themes that he weaves, he points us to how do we strive after God? How do we seek after God in the midst of all the chaos, in the midst of just life, the things that life can throw at us? Right? How do we live well? How do we find our meaning and purpose in God? And he says, he gives a few things I want us to kind of leave with. So how do we live well? How do we find our meaning in God? Well, he says it starts accepting our limitations. Right? Accepting our limitations. Accepting the fact that, man, we can't control everything. He says, accept the way God does things, for who can straighten what he has made crooked? Right? So since we can't control a lot of things in life, we need to learn to hold things loosely. And so instead of focusing our attention on the things that we can't control, instead focus on our attitude towards the present. Right? Focus on, man, I can't control everything that's happening around me, but I can control how I respond to it. I can control my attitude to what's happening in my life right now. I'll be honest, this is one of the hardest things for me to recognize. Because for me, I guess a moment of vulnerability a little bit, especially if I'm planning something, I'm doing something, I like knowing that I've thought through all the unexpecteds, right? I like knowing that, hey, I've planned out everything, so nothing's going to catch me by surprise. I got everything. And literally, I think part of God's sense of humor, he's like, yeah, watch this, right? Some of the things, I have, whenever I'm planning like a youth retreat, I'm always like, man, okay, I've buttoned down everything. Nothing's going to go unexpected. I got this. So a little funny thing, I remember our last spring retreat, and Jack, you'll appreciate this, buddy. I'm like, man, I got my list. I checked it 3 times. We're set. We got this. And 5 minutes into being in spring retreat, someone's like, hey, where are the drumsticks? I'm like, oh. And if you go on this wall, there's a picture of Jack playing with spoons because we forgot drumsticks. But the thing is, right, recognizing, and there's things that we can't, like weather, right, all kinds of things that happen, I couldn't plan for that, and there's massive things, those are kind of silly, low-key examples, but things health things, things with our health, things can happen unexpectedly. We can, a tragedy can strike and happen to us. All kinds of things can happen, large-scale things having a job layoff, right? Those kind of things, we can't control those things. And so what God tells us, recognize, one of the things he invites us into is accept your limitations. Trust me, even when things are unpredictable, because you can't control things, but I'm here with you in that moment. So accepting our limitations, right? But then also finding joy in the little things in life. Finding joy in the, accepting our limitations, but then enjoying the moments, enjoying the little moments, right? Since life is fleeting and we can't control everything, we need to learn to enjoy the present and not take things for granted, right? Recognize them for what they really are, and that's gifts from God. I love this verse. He says, even so, I've noticed one thing at least that is good. It is good for people to eat, drink, and enjoy their work under the sun during the short life God has given them, and to accept their lot in life. It is a good thing to receive wealth from God and the good health to enjoy it, to enjoy your work and accept your lot in life. That is indeed a gift from God. Right? Life can be crazy, it can be stressful, it can be chaotic, but there's also really beautiful moments that are in life. There's some really, really sweet moments. One of my favorite things to do at our house is, enjoying a good cup of coffee on my back deck. And just having 15 minutes just to stare out into looking out the mountains, looking out into the trees. It's just beautiful, and I love it. Or getting to sit on my couch and watch Ellie just do her 15th lap around the living room, just go nuts, playing with Legos, doing all kinds of stuff. It's just those little things. I love that. We got to take a little trip to Leavenworth last summer, and it was just a blast watching, hanging out with the family, just enjoying some sunshine. And so those little things, right? Not saying oh man, well, this is fun, but man, I got to come back to this. Oh, this is going to be really rough. It's just being able to say, you know what, this is a beautiful moment. I'm really enjoying, I get to spend time with the people around me right now. Or man, I'm really enjoying this part of the season of my life. And I know sometimes that can be hard. But I think what I would say is what this is spurring is practicing gratitude. Saying, God, these other parts of my life are really hard, but there's some really beautiful parts I'm really thankful for, and I'm thankful for you for that. And so how do we live well, right? It's recognizing that accepting our limitations and not trying to put too much on our shoulders that shouldn't be there. Enjoying the little things, right? Being grateful for the little things we have in life and really just enjoying those things and being thankful and celebrating those things. And this last one is probably, I think, the author really lands and highlights this, is fearing God and obeying Him. If we want to really find lasting meaning and significance and joy, that doesn't come and go with the circumstance, because it happens by fearing God and obeying Him. Now I'll read this verse first. He says, "Now all has been heard, and here is the conclusion of the matter: fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Now, we hear that word, right, fear, and maybe like when we usually hear that word fear, and it might be confusing when we think of something joyful or something happy and saying, hey, you should fear God. And when we hear that, right, we typically think of like terror and fright, right? We think of those kind of things, like watching a scary movie, you have fear, or like me, I see a spider that's bigger than this, I'm nervous, right? I'm afraid, right? I don't vibe with that. And maybe for you it's other things, but like that, those are the kind of things that it conjures in our mind, right? Fear. But what this word's really getting at is fear in the context of seeing it as honor, reverence, and awe for somebody or something. Having the sense of honor, reverence, and awe, right? I think of like when a few years ago we got to go to the ocean, and one of my favorite places going to the ocean. And I remember we had this, like a hotel room that had like a deck that looked out. If you've ever been to Haystack Rock over by Cannon Beach, oh man, that's like my happy place if I think about it. But getting to sit out, look at the ocean, I was sitting there and I could hear just the roar of the ocean. And there was a sense like there was some real beauty in that. Like I was sitting there, I was looking out and I was just taking it in. But there's also a part of the ocean where I have a healthy level of respect for the ocean, right? Where I'm taking in by its beauty, I love it, it brings me peace. But there's also this healthy sense of respect, right? That I know the power that ocean has, and I know I shouldn't take the ocean lightly, right? And I think that I think what God is saying, he's asking us the same thing with him. He goes, man, you want to find meaning? He goes, I want you, I think what the teacher is telling us is that the key to living well in this chaotic world is not found in money. It's not found in a career or in success. And while all those things are good, they shouldn't be where our meaning is. They shouldn't be where our life significance is at. Because they're fleeting. They're hevel. It's like chasing after the wind. But what he says where our meaning and our significance should be is being in awe of God. And living in a way to honor him and love him. Because when we trust in God and we trust that he truly loves and cares for us and are willing to follow him through the chaos of life sometimes, it's there that we'll find that eternal meaning to our lives. It's there when we trust that, God, I know you care about me, and I'm willing to follow you because I trust you. I'm willing to follow you because even though this is scary, I don't really know what's happening in this moment, I don't really know what to do, I trust that you do. And I can follow you in that. It's there that we find, and it's with him and in him that we find what it really means to live a well-lived life. And I think that's where the teacher's trying to lead us to. Right? It's like, man, God, I don't know, because I think at some point we all find those moments where we're like, I don't know what to do. Things just seem really too difficult right now. Things seem too hard. God, I don't know what to do, but I trust that if I'm with you, I'm going to be okay. If I'm with you, I can follow you. I know that, man, in you I'll find my meaning, in you I find my purpose, and that is where I'll be able to find that lasting meaning, what a well-lived life looks like. And that's, man, I would encourage you guys this week, man, read, now that we've kind of given an overview, go read this book. Because if you're like me, and unfortunately, I'm not as wise as some of you, where I haven't lived as much life, but I've lived enough to experience hurt. Right? I've lived enough to have my own wounds and scars through life. And what I love about Ecclesiastes is that when I read it, I feel heard. I feel like this book acknowledges the complexities of life, but also points me to the beauty of following God and finding that meaning in that. And so I encourage you, man, this week, sit down with us and say, God, what is this? Show me what does this mean for me to follow you and fear you and obey you? And actually, as we think about our thought for the drive home, I want us to wrestle with that. Think about for you, man, what areas of your life are you tempted to find your meaning and significance apart from God? Like, what are the things that most tempt you and most try to drag you away and finding your meaning and significance in other things? And then what would it look like for you to trust God and obey him even through the chaos of life? What would it look for you to trust him and say, God, I don't totally know what to do in this moment, but I trust that if I follow you and I lean into you and I just remember who you are, then I can trust you that you know what to do, and I can follow you, and I'll be okay. So I want to pray for us, and I'm going to invite our worship team to come on up. Oh, communion. Just kidding. We'll get to that in a second. But let me pray for us, and then we'll go into communion. God, thank you so much for just that truth. That God, that, yeah, man, sometimes life doesn't make sense. Sometimes life we can't wrap our mind around it. But Lord, thank you that, God, we don't have to be in control. We don't have to know everything, know what's around every corner. And that, Lord, thank you that, man, that while we love our jobs, we love the things that happen in our life, the things we get to do and get to experience. That Lord, there's a meaning that comes in following you and obeying you that supersedes all those things. And so, Lord, I just pray that we can be willing to follow you and trust you. Even when life doesn't make sense, even when life feels like an enigma, even when it just feels like vapor and smoke, help us to follow you and trust you. So God, we say all this, Lord, in your name. Amen. So hey, right now, I'm going to go ahead and invite our servers to go ahead and come on up. And so, guys, as we're talking about this, here in a moment, we're going to have a chance to really celebrate. We're talking about trusting and following God, even the chaos. We have a moment to really celebrate who Jesus is and celebrate that the invitation he gives to us that, hey, that we get to follow him even and trust him and reflect on the love he has for us, even when things feel a little bit chaotic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. We're going to divvy out the elements. You're going to come on up from the side to our servers here. You're going to take the bread and the cup, and then we'll sit together, and then we'll partake of this together.